Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. Give me 1 second here to make sure everything is working correctly on my end in terms of audio and video. So give me 1 second here. Hopefully all will be running smoothly. I'm not seeing the live video on my stream here. So give me 1 second. Oh, I think we found it. All right. Okay, excellent. So we are up and running and we have everything working. So let me say it again. Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. I'm Dr. Christopher Brellox. My apologies. Normally I intend to be doing this every other Saturday. So every 2 weeks I'll do one of these on a Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I know that it is well past 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're coming up on 3:30 now here. I ran into some technical difficulties. I think I've resolved them all. Speaking of technical difficulties, for those of you who were with me 2 weeks ago, I had another technical difficulty, and I think I'm learning every time I do one of these videos. So what happened last week is I did not charge the wireless. I have a wireless lav mic, and so the receiver and the transponder or whatever you call it ran out of battery, and I didn't realize it. So I just kept talking, and I kept talking, and I kept talking, and I kept talking. I finally, because normally what I do with the chat is I scroll up so that I'm seeing the oldest one, so that I can kind of answer people's questions in the order that they give them. And so I'm answering questions. And I didn't see that everyone was like at the end, writing new chats being like, Dr. B, we can't hear you, we can't hear you. And so by the time it took me like 3 questions to get to that point where I was like, oh, how long have they not been able to hear me? And so I ended the video because I was like, oh man, the battery died. There was nothing I could do to get it back at that juncture. So I start reading these things, and at first I'm getting so mad at myself for I'm like, I can't believe I didn't charge it correctly. I didn't know. I was like getting mad, and then I'm reading through the comments, and someone said something like, I bet you he's going to be really mad, which actually made me just laugh so hard because they're like, oh man, some of you people already know me well enough to know exactly how I feel. So I appreciate that, all those comments, and everyone was essentially like yelling as loud as he could through chat, text message to like let me know, and I appreciated that because even though it didn't let me know that something was wrong because I wasn't looking at those, it was helpful in the fact that when I read them, it started making me crack up and been like, ah. But since then, I've learned how I actually found the way you can tell when you have a full charge on my wireless microphone setup, and I didn't know about that. So now I totally charged them 100%. One of the other issues is that I'm using my phone to stream, and sometimes it's an older phone, and sometimes the connection gets a little funny, so it takes me a while to figure out how to make sure that it's plugged in and the connection is strong enough. So suffice it to say, and I apologize for all of you who are just like, get on with the music theory. So I think it's gonna be better this time, folks. Fingers crossed. I think the phone's going to keep its battery charge. I think the wireless mic's going to keep its battery charge. I got everything worked out, so hopefully we can not have one of those anticlimactic endings to one of the videos where I just kind of fade out and just keep talking for a while. And some of you are like, well, he's writing stuff on the board. It's kind of helpful. So anyways, thank you so much for sticking with me. And I am learning a lot, both from the technical side as well as from the music theory side. So before we get started on today's topic, I wanted to announce something that I'm really excited about. I've been thinking for over a year that I really should have a Dr. B Music Theory jingle. And I'm just so busy. So as much as I love this idea, I haven't had a chance to actually I kind of semi-wrote the jingle, but I haven't had a chance to put it in and then record it and all that kind of stuff. I just haven't had the time. So here's what I want to do. I want to give all of you an opportunity to write a Dr. B Music Theory jingle. And if I choose your jingle, we will do a one-on-one Zoom music theory chat where I will answer all your questions and we can just have a conversation about music theory. 30 minutes on me, that's the prize. If I use your jingle, I'll you know, send me an email. I'll respond to you and I'll let you know exactly how, you know, when we can set up. We'll schedule a time. But let me give you the specifics. So here's what I'm looking for. And this is I like this because, you know, it'll show me to a certain extent, have you put some of these things that we've been talking about into practice? Are you actually able to compose something that, you know, has benefited from watching my YouTube channel? And if that's the case, it would make me feel great. So we want a Dr. B. So here's the words. Here's the deal. I want you to set the words. Ask Dr. B about music theory. So that's the text, right? Those are the lyrics. Okay? Lyrics. Right? And so, and as I said, the prize is we'll schedule a 30-minute one-on-one chat where you can ask me any questions, you can interrupt me, and you can get a little bit of advice. I want this in terms of length to be somewhere between 6 seconds maybe and 15 seconds. These are approximate, right? Not long. A short jingle, something nice and short, and you're going to send it to me in like, you know, like a hopefully not a preferably not MP3, like a WAV file or some high-res file so the audio quality can be good. So you'll send that to me, and you can send that you can send it to me via, I guess you could do it through my Facebook channel. You could also send it via to cbsaxophone at gmail.com. So cbsaxophone at gmail.com. You can use things like WeTransfer if it's a big file. This is a great service, WeTransfer.com, that allows you to share files, larger files, with other people. So let me just say again what I'm looking for. The style of music can be any style. So it doesn't have to be like classical, Bach, chorale, what we're using. It doesn't have to follow the music theory rules. That's okay. You can make up your own rules. All I care about is that it sounds good. If it sounds good, I'm gonna want to use it for my jingle. And what I'll probably do is I'll try you know, especially I don't know how I would use it on my live videos, which is what I'm doing the most now. But there might be a way for me to do a live video and then tack it on at the beginning and at the end, which I think would be totally fun. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with it. And if I go back to making videos ahead of time and then releasing them, then I definitely know how I can tack it on at the beginning and end of those. So that's how I intend to use it. So when you send it to me, that's the deal, right? Like, you're not going to get a cut of the money because I'm not making a ton of money. I'll just tell you right now. And that's fine. That's okay. It's like you giving me all the rights to use it however I see fit. So you're giving me all the rights to use your jingle. I'm giving you 30 minutes one-on-one. And it's for fun, right? This is the idea. So send it. I want to hear the lyrics. Ask Dr. B about music theory. Any style of music, you got to record it. So however you want to record it, whether that's with live instruments or MIDI instruments or something else, whatever you think would make it fun. You know, it could be shorter than 6 seconds maybe, but 6 seconds to 15 seconds is what I'm thinking. A WAV file. You can send it to me via WeTransfer.com. You can send it to cbsaxophone at gmail.com. And deadline. Let me take a look here. So let's say how about by the next 2 weeks from today? So 2 weeks from today, which would be, let me just quickly look here what we're talking about, so I can make sure I'm giving you all the correct information. So November 7th. All right, And you know, I may do another one of these. So if for whatever reasons you try to do this and you don't get it done by November 7th, don't worry. Keep it on hand. I may be doing another one of these kind of contests for a Dr. B Music Theory jingle. So I'm pretty sure I will be. So the first one is gonna be due November 7th. I'm not sure when the next contest will be, but if yours is chosen, I would look forward to chatting with you about it and about any other of your music theory questions. So I'm excited to see what you all come up with, trying to either use this direct music theory stuff or incorporating it into any style of music, breaking the rules, coming up with your own rules. I'm excited to hear what you do. So anyways, that's what I'm going to do there. And then speaking of making money, I've been trying to make a little bit of money by allowing advertisements on my music theory videos. And I got a couple of you who sent me some emails saying that there were too many ads. And so I was like, well, I'm new to this, so I don't really know what I'm doing yet. So I went on and I looked and I tried to figure out what's going on. And I found out that for these live videos that I've been doing, they automatically put in ads like every 3 minutes, which I agree with you. That's way too many ads right in the middle of stuff. I'm in the middle of discussing something and you're interrupted every 3 minutes. So I changed it to like every 10 minutes. Let me know if that's still too much, right? My main thing is I want this to be useful to you. You know, if I can make a little bit of money to help incentivize me to keep the momentum going, then that's great, because certainly that helps keep me motivated. But I don't want to do that at the expense of having it being useful to you. So I noticed that my lesson videos, the ones that I had pre-recorded and put up a couple years ago, those didn't have anywhere near as many ads. But for you all watching this, I appreciate that kind of feedback. I'm trying to do something that's useful, that's fun for me to do, because I love talking about music theory and I love sharing my passion for music, and I want it to be useful to you. So if the ads are too many, you let me know. So thank you to the 3 people who said that it was too many for the live videos. You know, the ones that once you watch after it's been recorded live, you can watch it, and then it's got like so many ads on it. And I know YouTube has a way where they can get you to pay and you can remove all the ads. I get all that, but I really want my music theory stuff to be available and affordable to everyone. So I was just listening to a NPR podcast, How I Built This, where he interviewed the guy who developed Khan Academy. And so I started looking into Khan Academy because a lot of his philosophy and his ideas on trying to provide education just to the world is very much in line with what my motives are for Dr. B Music Theory. I want anyone, anywhere to be able to learn more about music theory. So thank you for letting me know about those ads and keep me in the loop. So what I wanted to talk about in terms of now it's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work is how to read a transposed score. Normally, and let me talk to you about it. So a score is the collection of all the parts for all the instruments that are playing together. And so typically, if you're talking about a symphony orchestra, you're going to have instruments like Piccolo, Flute, Oboe, Bassoon, Trombone, Timpani, Violin, Viola, Cello, bass, and others. Okay, but these are a sample, and they'll be kind of like one piece of paper and have all these instruments, and have each part will have the music. And so a conductor or someone analyzing the music can look at the score, which is the collection of all the individual parts, and just look and see what each instrument is supposed to be doing in terms of rhythm, notes, melody, dynamics, everything. And the question is the score written in a concert key, meaning that every note you read on the score that's what it sounds like on the piano. So if you see a D on the score, it sounds like a D. So that's a concert score. But there's also something called a transposed score. And a transposed score is where when you look at the score, you're looking at what the player, the performer of that instrument is looking at. And what happens is that there's certain instruments that when they look at the note, for them, when they play it, it doesn't sound like that on like the piano or what's called concert instruments. So these are called transposing instruments. Instruments like clarinet, French horn, and trumpet are three of the most common transposing instruments. So if you're looking at a transposed score, you're going to see these instruments, which are concert instruments, and they're going to, when you look at their note, it's going to sound the exact same way as it looks. But when you see the clarinet, French horn, or trumpet part, what you look at as the note, like let's say you see the note C that's written for your trumpet player, it's probably not going to sound like a C. It's going to be, because it's a transposing instrument most of the time. All right, and I'm going to explain more about that. But a transposed score, again, is where you get to look at exactly what the performers are going to look at. Now, some of you might be thinking, what is he talking about? Why would anyone write anything anyway other than the way it's supposed to sound? That's just crazy. And there is a reason. There's a reason for everything. And one of those primary reasons is if we take, for instance, clarinet. We have clarinet. Clarinets come in the key of B flat, A, D, E flat. And what that means is that a clarinet looking at the note C, it might come out as a D, a B flat, an E flat, an A, even though they're looking and fingering the C. Now, why do that? Well, because now as the clarinet player, you can just use the same fingerings and read it the exact same way, regardless of which type of clarinet you're playing. A B flat clarinet, an A clarinet, a D clarinet, an E flat clarinet. It makes it easier for the performer. That's the main reason we have transposing instruments, to make it easier for the performer. So if I'm the clarinet player, if I had to learn a new set of fingerings for every different clarinet I wanted to play, that would make my life a lot harder. Whereas the way it works now is that you have the effort is put on the part of the composer or the arranger. It's the job of the composer or the arranger to make sure that it's transposed correctly so that the performer can just use the same fingerings they use on every clarinet, and then it just comes out differently. But that's where the effort goes. The idea is to take the work off of make it easier for the performer, because the performer, like, their job is to have a great tone, make use of vibrato when appropriate, play every note perfectly, cleanly, play the dynamics correctly, play the rhythms correctly, right? They have a big job. Performers have a major job when they have to look at a piece of music and then be like, I have to play this perfectly. There's so many things they need to think about. So the idea is, like, let's take one thing off of their plate, transposing, and give that to the arranger or the composer. That said, there are still performers who are expected to know how to transpose. Even so, right? Even so, even then, but that's like another skill set and another skill level. So if you're going to write music, let's say for an elementary, middle school, or high school band or orchestra, you're not going to expect those kids to be able to transpose in their head on site. Maybe certain professionals you can have that expectation of. But even then, most composers are going to are going to give the musician something that's transposed, that's easy for them, so they can concentrate on other things. So for us, for you and I looking at it, a concert score, when would someone use a concert score? Well, sometimes a composer will use a concert score while they're in the process of composing, because they're just trying to get the melodies and the harmonies worked out. They don't need to be thinking about what instrument is playing what. And you're like, oh, I'm going to have the English horn play this, and then the French horn is going to play this part, and so I need to transpose stuff. Like, as a composer, in the compositional stage, you're not usually thinking of orchestration. And orchestration meaning what instrument is exactly going to play what part, what instruments are going to double each other. That's a whole orchestration question. And orchestration usually happens after composition. So I'm going to write that down because that's an important word to know. And orchestration doesn't just mean for the orchestra, it's for any, like if you're going to write for a jazz big band, we talk about orchestration. Orchestration is, again, which instrument is playing what, which instruments are doubling, which instruments are playing in harmony. It's the really investigating the aspect of timbre as a composer and arranger. And there's some great composers. There's some great Hollywood composers where there's someone who's the composer and they do a great job, and there's another person who does the orchestration. Even in musicals, so like Stephen Sondheim, who's written some of the most famous musicals, he's the composer and he partners with someone who does a lot of the orchestration for him. Not all the time, but a lot of the time he has a partnership. There's a composer, there's an orchestrator. So if you're looking at other job opportunities, if you want to make a living, most people don't even realize that that's actually a job you can have, being an orchestrator, taking a composer's melodies, harmonies, rhythms, and deciding how the orchestra is going to make that and make it sound good, and how an orchestra might make it sound good versus a choir versus a jazz band. That's all the job of the orchestrator. The orchestrator has to have an intimate understanding of the different timbres of the different instruments, how they blend together, and what kind of emotions you can get from these different timbres. How does a clarinet playing a melody feel differently than a flute playing the exact same melody? That's the job of an orchestrator. Some composers will do both. Many of the great classical composers did both. They would compose and then orchestrate their own music. But there's certain styles of music where those are two separate people. So a concert score is great for the composer and that process, and it's great for us in music theory if we want to analyze things and we don't want to have to use our transposition brain. Then looking at a concert score is going to be a lot easier. That said, why would we want a transposed score? Who would that be best suited for? The answer there is that's best for the conductor. The conductor who's rehearsing the ensemble, who wants to be able to instantly look at and see what everyone is supposed to be doing, and so that they can talk to the French hornist and say, oh, French horn, you have a written C sharp, written for them, right? As opposed to sounding. And oh, you're C sharp. So they can look and see exactly where it is and talk to those different instrumentalists if there's any issues that need to be resolved. So that's why a transposed score is particularly beneficial for the conductor. Now, interestingly enough, when you buy a lot of classical scores, they tend to be transposed scores, in part because as a student of music theory, transposition is one of the things that is expected for you to learn. So they're going to be expecting you to know how to transpose and look at that. And this is something you'll get tested on in placement exams. So it is definitely worth your while if you're looking to, if you have any placement exams or any kind of music theory exams in your future, knowing how to read a transposed score is going to be valuable and helpful. So a couple questions you need to ask yourself, and I'm trying to develop here is a checklist, because I love my checklists. And the reason I do is it gives you a step-by-step process that allows you to do things quickly and correctly. Because most of the times if you have any kind of examination, it's timed. You don't have unlimited time. And even if you do, let's say you're a composer and you've got unlimited time, do you really want to take longer than you need to? Wouldn't it be great if things could move faster? So here's a checklist. So step one, is it a concert or a transposed score? Because they might not tell you. You might have to figure it out by looking. So how do you tell when you look at a score whether it's a transposed or a concert score? So first question, a couple questions you got to ask yourself. One, do you happen to know if this piece is tonal or atonal? A tonal piece means that we're using traditional key signatures. Things are like in D major or B minor, etc. Atonal means there is no key center. This is common. Atonal music is common for early 20th century going forward. You have that kind of music. So if it's an atonal score, if it's an atonal score, it's probably concert. But not necessarily. Actually, no, that's not true at all. I take that back. It's not. that doesn't tell you anything. What it does is it helps you with this other question. So if you look at it, if you say, okay, this looks like an atonal piece, or I know it's an atonal piece, it means that the key signature that they give you is might not be helpful. If it's a tonal piece, then the key signature might be helpful, right? So if there's a key signature, you ask yourself, are there any sharps or flats? Okay, so let's say there's two sharps. You see two sharps in at least one of the lines, right? Then after you ask yourself, is there a key signature? The second question is, if there is a key signature, are they all the same or are they different? And when we say different, there's a couple instruments that are most likely to be the ones that are different. That is the clarinet, the horn, and the trumpet. So if you have, let's say you're looking at stuff and you see a violin that has two sharps and the clarinet doesn't, or the horn doesn't, or the trumpet doesn't, if they are different, this means you have a transposed score. So different key signatures in the same score means transposed. If they're all the same, so if you have the same key signature for trumpet and horn and clarinet and all these instruments, then there's a good chance it's a concert score. So if it's the same, good chance that we're talking it's a concert score. What makes this difficult is that there's so many variables that even though what I'm saying was going to lead you to the correct answer most of the time, there are exceptions. So this is why I'm saying, well, like, ask yourself, is this tonal or atonal? Because if it's atonal, then key signatures aren't going to help you much. If it's tonal, they will. So if you look and say, okay, we got a key signature for sure. I see that we got, let's say, two sharps in one part and we got four sharps in another part. Okay, so we got different parts with different key signatures. That definitely means it's a transposed score. So once you've determined it's a transposed score, then we can move forward. If it's a concert score, your job is done. You can just look at and read what's there, and you're good to go. But once you've decided that it's a concert score, the next step is I want you to put a check. I want a check mark next to all the concert instruments. And another way to say concert instruments is to say in C. So these are those instruments. And this is just an exercise, and if you don't need to do it and you can skip this step, go ahead, right? But if you're beginning to learn how to read transposed scores and transpose instruments, this is a good way to remind yourself. That's very quick, right? You just put a check next to Piccolo, Flute, Oboe, Bassoon, Trombone, Timpani, Violin, Viola, Cello, bass. These are your concert instruments. And by concert, what that means is that when the oboe player looks at their music and they on their music, right? Let me even do it a little bit differently. They look on their music and they see the note C. It sounds like the note C. That's what it means to be in concert. Where did I put my black marker? One moment. I have so many papers here. No black marker. All right. We're going to improvise here. So, if the flute player sees this treble clef, the note C, they have a fingering, they play that note, it's going to sound like a C on the piano and for all these instruments. This is true for all of these instruments. The note they read on the staff is the way it sounds in the accepted terminology for naming pitches. So put a check mark next to all of our concert instruments in C. Now, one thing that's going to make this a little bit harder is that much of the music that we're going to be looking at was composed by composers in other countries like Germany or Italy or France. And so the names of these instruments are sometimes a little bit different. So I'm going to give you some of the different instrument names to kind of help you out. So like, and I like to use it in this order. So English, German, Italian, French, or what I like to say is EGIF. If you want to remember the order, that's my little acronym, EGIF. So the English, so it's really interesting how sometimes certain languages are very similar and others not. So in German, so this is the next one, Kleine, which means little in German. They call it the Kleine Flöte. So it has these two little dots above the O. So you can see how it looks very much like the word flute. And in German, Flute, it's like Flöte. It was this O with what's called an umlaut. And if we compare it to Italian, they call it Flauto. And if we can to French, it has this accent over it, right? Well, you can see that flute, it kind of looks like flute in all four of the languages. And the only really thing I want you to know is that Kleine means little. So Piccolo is like a little small flute. It's like, so it's an octave higher. So that's what we have for flute. For oboe, in German, it's the same thing. So I'm just going to put those little dots there. In Italian, it's the same thing. But in French, this is what you'll see. And my French pronunciation is terrible. Hautbois, maybe is how you say it, something like that. But that's what oboe looks like. And for bassoon, bassoon has a very different looking name that you should know. Fagott or Fagotto. And it's actually bassoon in French, but for in German and Italian, you could see it look like this instead. And in English, bundle of sticks, a faggot, bundle of sticks is the original definition of that word. So if you think about the bassoon, which is like kind of two long sticks, you can see how it got its name in both German and Italian. For trombone, the German word is very different. Let me spell that correctly and clearly for you. It's Pasaune. Again, please forgive my pronunciation. I know I'm not very good at that. And it's trombone in the other two languages, so I'm giving you the other different name for timpani, Pauken in Germany, and then Timpano, and then Timbales, which is very different. Like, don't get confused when you look at this. Like, so in English, when we say timbales, we're talking about like South American instrument that Tito Puente would play, a very thin drum, high pitched, kind of looks like a snare drum. It's that is the word in French for timpani. And then here for our violin family, we're going to have words that are very similar, but we also might have Geige, that's German, or then something that looks like that. For viola, you'll have something that looks like that, or Bratsche. Another option is some will just call it alto. So like in French, they'll call it alto sometimes. Cello will often be violoncello or something similar. Some of the vowels might be a little different in the different languages. And then bass is often called, in English, is often called double bass. In other languages, they'll call it contrabass, either with a K or a C, depending on which exact language we're talking about. So again, as you're trying to do my step 2 on your checklist of putting a check next to all the concert instruments, one of the things that might hold you up or slow you down is if you get hung up on the different languages in terms of the names of the instruments. So if you're looking at a score that's in German or French or Italian, you might get stuck. And so this should help you, right? If you kind of like just remember some of these few exceptions that are a little bit different, right? So right there, that, this whole one here Yep, I kind of gave you those ones that are different. Flute is pretty easy, right? But there's the bulk of the things that you're going to want to pay attention to. Also, keep in mind, there's something called score order, which essentially goes woodwinds at the top, then brass, then percussion, then strings. Okay? So let me put that again. So woodwinds are at the top of the page. Then you have your brass. Then you have percussion. And then you have strings. So this is score order. And within each of those sections, it goes from highest in pitch to lowest in pitch. So this is why at the very top you'd see Piccolo, then flute, then oboe. You'll then see instruments like the clarinet, but that's a transposing instrument. So this is not the exact order. We're going to insert our transposing instruments into these. But in the string section, violin is the highest, then viola is the next lowest, then cello, and then finally the bass. So again, within score order, we have it by instrument family, and then from high to low. So after you've done that check, right, and you haven't been thrown off base by all the different names, you then have to ask yourself, do all these C instruments have the same key signature? Do they all have the same key signature? And usually they should, right? They should, but if they don't, it might still be okay. Timpani and percussion instruments in general sometimes do not use a key signature. That doesn't mean that we're not dealing with it still could be a transposed score, and those instruments are still in C. It just means that if it's a pitched percussion instrument, they're probably going to be putting in accidentals that are in the key signature for these other C instruments. So again, these are the clues you want to be looking for. Asking yourself, do all the C instruments have the same key signature? If they do, then that's expected and your life is easy. If they don't, hopefully it's just the timpani. If it's other instruments, then you have to start worrying about whether some of these instruments are in unusual keys or something else is going on. Maybe it's something very atonal or avant-garde where it's polytonal, and there's specifically things being written in different keys for the ease of performance, but it's not actually the way it's sounding. But there should be more clarification in the score if that's the case. So let me erase this and kind of tell you what kind of clarification you should come to expect. So take a look at this, take a screenshot if you need it, go back and pause it if you want to, but we're going to erase this and we're going to talk about the next step. So step one, are you dealing with a concert versus a transposed score? Step two, put a check next to all the concert instruments. And that's going to be important because the next step is to identify the transposing instruments. And then we talk about how we're going to read the parts for those transposed instruments. So, step three, put a star next to all instruments not normally in C. All right, so you're going to put a star. And I already wrote for you what those instruments are, right? We said the clarinet, the horn. Oops, I spelled that wrong. The clarinet, horn, which is the same thing as saying French horn. In this case, if you don't use the word French in front of it, the assumption is French horn. So you just say horn, it's assuming French horn. There is something called the English horn. It's a completely different family of instruments. So the English horn is a double reed instrument like the oboe, and it's in the woodwind family. But the horn, the French horn, is a brass instrument. So again, if you just say horn, the assumption is French horn, brass instrument. And then lastly, the trumpet. These are your big three instruments that you're typically going to see. I'm going to also write here saxophone, because that's my instrument. Saxophone is also a transposing instrument, but saxophone is you absolutely will find it in the scores of Vaughan Williams, the English composer, Maurice Ravel. You'll find it in the music of Debussy. You will find it in the music of Georges Bizet. You will find it in Jules Massenet. Saxophone is extensively used by French composers, German composers, Russian composers like Prokofiev and Shostakovich. English composers, so saxophone is widely used, but if we're going all the way back, saxophone was invented in 1840, so if we go back to Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart, saxophone hadn't been invented. So I'm going to put the saxophone there as well, but we're going to focus our attention on the clarinet, horn, and trumpet. The principles will be the same, and you'll know how to transpose the saxophone if you know how to transpose these instruments. So again, making sure you can identify what they are. The clarinet, it's always going to look like the word clarinet, right? It's going to be very, very similar. So German is like clarinet, like that. Italian is clarinetto. Clarinet in French looks very similar as well. Horn is very different. So in German, it looks the same, but in Italian, it's corno. And in French, it's just cor. So horn, corn, cor, these are the options you'll see. Trumpet is one that's easily confused. You can make a big mistake with that, right? So let me tell you how. So it looks very similar. The word looks similar in German and French, but not in Italian. So in German, trompeta, like that. But in Italian, it's tromba. And let me tell you, more than once, when I was young, looking at scores, I'd be like, man, that's a weird trombone part. I thought it was short for tromba, it was short for trombone. It's not, right? It's Italian for trumpet. Okay, so that's again the names, and you're going to put a star next to each one of these so that you know the instruments on the score that are transposed. And what that means is if you try to play that clarinet note and play it on the piano, just like exactly reading it the same way, it's not going to sound right. It's not going to work. Okay? So what's nice is most scores, most transposed scores will tell you what key this clarinet, horn, or trumpet are in. And so let me give you a little grid to show you. And it's interesting here how English and German are kind of the most similar in terms of the way they indicate keys. And then Italian and French are similar on how they relate to keys. So let me teach you and tell you about these different ways, because again, what I want you to be able to do is look at a transposed score and understand the terminology and the symbols being used. This is also going to be helpful for all of you who eventually want to write for an orchestra, write a symphony, or who want to get into arranging, especially for like any kind of movies, or let's say a Dr. B music theory jingle. You might want to know how this is done. So in English, if an instrument's in C, D, E, F, G, or A, that's exactly, they use the same thing. So you might see something like trumpet in D. If it's a score in German, you'll see, trompeta, maybe it'll say either in D, or maybe it'll say auf, or it might just say D trumpet. Okay, go with D, put the D trompeta. Trumpet in D is the same thing as saying D trumpet. So either way. Now in Italian and in French, they use solfege. They use like fixed do. So they'll use ut, which is the same thing as saying do. So ut is the French version. So I actually write it like this, right? So in Italian, it's do, re, mi, fa, so, la. And it's the same thing in French, except that instead of do, they use ut, which is like the Latin. So ut was the Latin. So Guido of Arezzo, the Guidonian hand, the person who's kind of inventing all this solfege, Latin ut. So the French will use ut, whereas in Italian they'll use do, and then both of them will use re, mi, fa, sol, la. So you might see tromba in fa, or which would mean a trumpet in F, or tromba in mi. So that mi will stand. So this would be C, D. So C, D, E, F, G, A. So they're using a fixed do to indicate the key. So you might see horn, like, or corno, cor, in sol, horn in fa. F is the key that the horn is most typically found in, but they do exist in other keys. So that helps you with these letters, but there's so many different transpositions, and it's really easy to get confused. Let me tell you some spots where it's really easy. In English, if they have an instrument in B, and there's almost no instrument that's in B, but it's possible, it does. In German, instead of B, it's called H. And in English, here's what's going to blow your mind. It's when you say an instrument's in B flat, in German they say it's in B. Let me tell you, that's going to lead to some confusion if you don't remember this little hint that I'm giving you right now. In English, if we were to say horn in B, to do it in German, you'd have to say corno in H. And if in German, if you see trumpet in B, what they really mean for us speaking in English is trumpet in B flat, right? So don't, like, trumpet is most commonly found in B flat. So you'll see all these trompeta in B, right? What they really mean is B flat. So in German, B is B flat and H is B natural, right? Blows your mind. Now, in Italian and French, they're using still solfege, but instead of T, which is what we use like in America, they use C. So it's C for both. And for B flat, they'll do C flat. Be careful. If you can easily mistake that and be like, what is sib? What's sib? It's C flat, like do re mi fa sol la si, or ut re mi fa sol la si flat, not sib, right? But these are the types of things that if you're trying to like look at a score and understand what's going on, you could spend so many time being like, I don't know what they're talking about. But I'm giving you all that information right here, okay? So hopefully this will help, and you can use this as a reference. Another way that you can sometimes see it, it'll look like C flat. Sometimes they'll write it as C hyphen, and it'll be written like this, bemol, which is basically means flat, right? This is the same thing as saying flat. That's typically found in French. You might see that. Now, you'll have other things like E flat and A flat, if an instrument's in E flat or A flat. And so in German, they just say they use an S instead of the flat sign. So they'll use ES or AS. And that's the equivalent of E flat, A flat. In German, ES, AS. Here in Italian and French, they're going to use the solfege. So it's going to be mi flat or la flat. Again, it's not mib and lab. It's mi flat, la flat, or bemol. Then you have some exceptions. You do have some exceptions. So for D flat, I would expect it to be DS to stick, but that's not what they use. They use DES. And then finally, the last one I wanted to mention for you, and I'm going to put it right up here. F sharp. For instruments in F sharp. For German, it's FIS. So is what is sharp becomes is in German, and in French, you have that. All right. So this is like a kind of like a complex chart on how they will indicate in a transposed score. They will often say the name of the instrument and then what key it's in. But keep in mind that if it's in German, you might be seeing things like H or FIS or ES. And ES, AS means E flat, A flat. DES, des, means D flat. FIS means F sharp. We have the H and the B that we know. The B means B flat. The H means B natural. And if you're looking at a score that's in Italian or French, you're going to see a lot of these solfege syllables, and then either accidentals like flats or sharps, or maybe some of these indicators here spelled out, meaning flat and sharp. All right? So, once you've really and once you've kind of translated that into your understanding, clarinet in whatever key they're telling you, there's a next step. And I'm going to say this slowly a couple times just to see if you can remember this, what it means, okay? What does it mean to be in F or be in B flat? What does it mean? And that's what I want to explain to you now, because this is going to be what's going to make it easy for you to actually transpose those individual parts that need to be transposed. All right? So I'm going to put a treble clef. I'm going to draw a C. And I'm going to say that this, what this is, this C, is the instrument's written part. All right? So this C represents, let's say we have, and let's get specific, right? Let's say we have clarinet in, and let's say it looks like this. It's spelled, it's obviously not written in English. This is German, and it says in B, so we know that it's the same thing as clarinet in B flat. So if this is clarinet in B flat, what it means to be in B flat means that when me, the clarinet player, looks on the music and says, here's a C, and fingers a C, what it really sounds like to everybody else, they hear a B flat. That's why it got the name in B flat. If it was clarinet in D, okay, and actually I should have, let me change that so it's the blue. Let's say it's clarinet in D. What that means is, if I'm the clarinet in D, I look at a C, I see it on my paper, I see the note C, I finger a C, what it sounds like is a D. That's how it got its name. Clarinet in D means when the clarinet player looks at a C on the written page and plays that fingering, a C for them, it actually comes out for everybody else as the note that's the name of that instrument. So if it's clarinet in B flat, that means a written C for them sounds like a B flat. If it's a clarinet in D, means that the written C, they're playing the same fingering, right? Let me see if I can illustrate this with my colored pens, right? Here's my clarinet in B flat. I play a C on my red clarinet in B flat. I play a C on this clarinet. It sounds to the violin player, to the piano player, to everybody else, it sounds like a B flat. This is my clarinet in B flat. I play a C, it sounds like a B flat. That's why we call it clarinet in B flat. Now, I take my same clarinet, but it's now clarinet in D. I have my same fingering, my C fingering, and I'm looking at the C. Now I play it, and what it sounds like to that violin player, to that flute player, to that oboe player, it sounds like a D to them. Because this is my clarinet in D. This is why we call it a clarinet in D. Because when I play a C, it sounds like a D. That's what it means to be in a certain key. So the way you can always do that, so you're always thinking about it, is that when you're looking at the transposed part for them, and it's a clarinet in B flat, you know that it's not going to sound like that way and match the parts. It's going to sound that difference, right? And let me explain what you do then with that knowledge. I then want you to put an up arrow or down arrow to indicate the difference between the pitches. So if I am playing clarinet in D, when I see a C, it really sounds like a D. That is up a major second. And you put that right next to the part, right on the score, up a major second. What that means is every note you see for the clarinet in D, it's really going to sound up one major second for the whole piece. And for if it was a clarinet in B flat, that means C to B flat, that is down a major second. And so you put that with the arrow. That's the next step. You put a star next to all the instruments not normally in C. That's step one. Then you basically, if it's a transposed score, it's telling you what it's in. And then you put up or down arrows. Now, these up or down arrows will give you the right pitch name, but it might not put you in the correct octave, all right? So keep in mind that like smaller instruments, they're going to be in upper octaves and lower instruments in lower octaves. So clarinet in B flat versus bass clarinet in B flat. Those are not going to be the exact same B flat in the same octave. The bass clarinet B flat is going to be lower because it's a much bigger instrument. But for our purposes right now, in terms of just analyzing from a pitch perspective, the octave does not matter. It matters from an orchestrational standpoint, but it doesn't matter for analyzing what the pitch is. So we're going to start by just making sure we can analyze the pitches correctly before we start worrying about which octave they're in. But in terms of just getting a basic perspective, the bigger the instrument, the lower the octave. The smaller the instrument, the higher the octave. So you can kind of probably get in the ballpark. So you've looked at the instruments, you've seen what key it's indicated. We know the different ways in the different French, E-GIF, English, German, Italian, French. We know how they indicate it. We know what it means now to be in another key. It means that what's written for that instrument, that's a transposing instrument, sounds differently than it's written. So we put in the arrows to show. Now, the key signature is normally going to be transposed along in the same way. So let's say that we have this clarinet in B flat. Let's say that the key for concert, we have concert D major. If it's an instrument in B flat, right? Clarinet in B flat, that means we're transposing everything down a major second. That means that for the clarinet in B flat, the key signature should also be down a major second, which would be C major. Right? C major. So this is how we would know. If you see 0 sharps in this clarinet part and 2 sharps in the violin, the flute, the oboe, then we know. All right? So again, that's how we're making sure we do this. Now let me just think about 1 second to make sure I got everything is clearly here, right? So did I do this backwards? Uh-oh. So the clarinet in B flat, that means that, okay. No, I did it backwards. See, it's so easy to do this backwards. I did it backwards. Right now, we're only talking about going from the written to concert. So if you see, let's say, the key signature written out, and let's say it's written 1 sharp, 2 sharp, 3 sharp, 4 sharp. That would be E major. And that E major down a major second would be D major. So I misspoke just a second ago. And let this be a warning to you as well. It's so easy to flip which direction you're going and do it backwards. So down a major second versus up a major second, you can get all things confused. When you're really thinking about what we're talking about with these areas is arrows, is from written to sounding, not the other way around. From sounding to written, it's the opposite. So when I say the next step after you've done that is to say, to put the arrows, so let me just put this here. So put arrows for transposition, and then after that, look at the key signature. So let's say you look at the key signature for your B flat clarinet and you see 4 sharps, and you say, well, how does that sound? It sounds the same way as the notes do. E major sounds like D major, and if our key really is D major, it lines up. And then if the key signatures match, it's a good way for you to double check your work and make sure that you've done the transpositions correctly, right? So let me read that again. Is the key signature correctly transposed? Hint, if they match, the transposed one and the concert one, if they match by your formula, that means you probably transpose things correctly. If they don't, you still might be okay. Because what happens is sometimes composers will put it in a key signature that's easier for the performer to read. So that, they might say, oh, 4 sharps, that's harder to read. I'm just going to put it in another key and put a couple sharps in as needed. This is especially true if you're dealing with an atonal score, where key signatures don't particularly matter or aren't really relevant, or whether it's in an unusual key that requires, if there's lots of accidentals, sometimes they'll just put it in a kind of generic key. So sometimes they'll just use no key signature for a transposing instrument, and they'll sometimes write in all the accidentals for the transposing instrument. Let me say that again. Sometimes they will make it look like it's the key of C major for that transposing instrument, but it really isn't. And they'll just write in all the accidentals that are applied. So this is another one of those pitfalls. If the key signature lines up, then you know you're in good shape. If it doesn't mean you're wrong, it just means you got to be extra careful, okay? So don't get thrown off if the key signatures don't match. Now, another hint on how you can kind of check your work is to look and see if there's any doublings. So for example, if you find a melody that looks almost exactly the same in the flute and in the trumpet, it might be that they're playing the exact same thing. Or trumpet and flute are not common doublings, but let's say trumpet and horn might sometimes play the exact same melody, but they're usually in different keys. Or the trumpet and let's say the trombone, and they're transposing instrument versus a concert instrument. So if you can see, oh, they're supposed to be playing the exact same melody. Now they might be playing it in harmony, in which case you got to be careful that you're not assuming that they're supposed to be playing the exact same pitch. But sometimes, and it's not infrequent, composers will have instruments doubling each other. And you can check in your transposition by seeing the line that's doubled and saying, oh yeah, I got it correct. The other way to do it is look, if it's a tonal piece, is to look at the chord and make sure that all the notes are in that chord, right? So if you're looking at it and let's say you look at your string section, and your string section is obviously playing a D major triad. And then you look at your instrument that you thought was transposing, let's say the horn in F. What you're going to do is say, well, does my transposition make sense in the key of that D major triad? Does the notes that the horn playing make sense for a D major triad? Is it a D? Is it an F sharp? Is it an A? Or is it playing a passing tone or some other obvious non-chord tone? If not, you might be wrong and you want to double check your work. So what I want to do now, and I know this is a long explanation. If you do want more, you can watch my lesson 14, which is on part writing and transposition. First part of the lesson is on part writing. The second part is on transposition. So I talk about this, and I talk about going both from the transposed score to concert, which is what I'm talking about now, as well as the other way around from a concert score to write for that transposed instrument. Super easy. You saw me just get confused for a second right there myself, doing which way you're going. So you can get more information by watching my lesson 14 if you want. So let's look at some specifics, okay? We'll look at some specifics here and see if we can put this into practice. And these questions are coming from one of my Patreon subscribers who is getting ready for a big examination where this is what's required. You have to look at a transposed score, and then you have to identify the intervals between different instruments that are written in different keys. And so what I'm trying to do is provide a nice checklist so that that can be done in a quick and correct fashion, right? Because you could spend, like, just me explaining it has been taking a long time, right? So just imagine you're in an exam and you're trying to figure this stuff out. You don't have unlimited time. You want to try to get it done quickly and correctly. Okay, 1 second here. My marker is not marking correctly, but I want to be able to write out some pitches here for you. So give me one moment. Okay. It might be time for some new markers. There we go. Alrighty. So, I'm going to give you some of the names of the instruments, specifically the transposing instruments. Okay? So there's claire, and sometimes there's plurals, so be careful. Like I was giving you the name of those instruments in the singular. Sometimes they're in plural, so we have clarinetin and A, so that's plural. So they'll write like a Roman numeral 1 and a Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. And they'll put it both on the same line. So they'll have, like, right here, clarinetin in A, and they'll have 1 and 2, and they'll write both parts on one staff for the score, not and sometimes for the player too, but often just in the score. So we have clarinetin in A. Okay. So what I would want you to do, based on my checklist, is to star that because it's a transposing instrument, and then decide what is that. So clarinetin in A. Clarinetin in A means that when they see the pitch C, it sounds an A. That is down a minor third. So actually I would put it right over here next to the star. Down minor third. Now again, that's not giving me the right octave necessarily, but it's giving you the right pitch. And that's the thing I want to be most focused on. Now what's interesting is another instrument in this same score is the bass clarinetta in B. Now, hopefully you can kind of say, this does not look like English. So is it French, German, Italian? And hopefully you remember, this B, that's what the Germans use. When they say B, for us it means B flat. So what that means, this is a transposing instrument. Clarinet in B flat means written C, sounds a B flat, that's down a major second. Now let me just write something that's in this score, right? So for the clarinet in A, they have this, E, F sharp, G sharp, like so. Now in the bass clarinet part, and this is treble clef, and bass clarinet is also written in treble clef. In the bass clarinet, it has E flat, F, G, like that. So we look at these things, and the rhythm is exactly the same, and the melodic contour is the same. So let's do our transposition magic and see if these are doubling or in harmony. So if this is our clarinet in A, and we know we want to go down a minor third, E down a minor third would be C sharp, F sharp down a minor third would be D sharp, G sharp down a minor third would be, you could say E sharp, or we could say F, right, and harmonically. Now let's look at our, this right here, this bottom one is our bass clarinet in B flat. We have to go down a major second, so E flat down a major second is D flat, F down a major second is E flat, G down a major second is F. Well, D flat and C sharp are enharmonically the same, D sharp, E flat are enharmonically the same, and F. So we know by checking the bass clarinet in B flat against the clarinet in A that we've done the correct transposition of going down a major second, down a minor third, that the pitches line up, right? We've done it correctly. And that's kind of like the most important thing. Once we've verified that, it works great. Now what's crazy about this specific piece is that the way they wrote it is the clarinet in A has one flat in the key signature. Again, so this is clarinet in A, has one flat, and the piece has two sharps. It's actually not D major, it's B minor, but so two sharps. So let's, it's either D major or B minor. It's more B minor, but it's not a very tonal piece, so it's hard to say whether it's really D major or B minor. It's closer to B minor, but let's say for the sake of transposition, it doesn't matter. So two sharps. If we say this is an F major or D minor, if we were to take this and we say it looks like it's an F the way it's written, and this is, again, I'm going a little bit quickly, so if you need to pause and rewind and go back after this live video is done, do so, because I know this is confusing. The clarinet in A, that A is referring to the way that instrument transposes what's written for them into what is sounding for everyone else. That's separate from what key it's written for this specific piece. So the clarinet in A is referring to the way the instrument changes the pitch for everyone else. The F, or F major or D minor here, is for this specific written way it looks. So we're talking about letters and keys in two different ways. So if we look at that and we say, okay, we know that our transposition is down a minor third, F major down a minor third would be D major. That matches up with all my other instruments. I feel really good about that. I feel super confident that my clarinet A has been transposed correctly. Now what makes me worried is that in this specific score that I'm looking at, for the bass clarinet, the bass clarinet is written with no sharps or flats in the key signature. And if that's the case, we would say that that's C major, and down a major second would make it B flat. But it's not in the key of B flat. So in this specific score, some of the key signatures have been transposed, like the clarinet in A, and some of the key signatures for the transposing instruments, like bass clarinet and B flat, were not transposed, which is why we have one that looks like with an E flat and another that looks like an E, and it's really in unison, but they're two instruments that are in keys a half step apart, so it makes sense that what they're looking like is a half step apart. And what actually is being heard is yet at another level. So what it's written for, what it looks like in B flat, what it looks like in A, what it really sounds like is the blue. Again, so many different pitch levels. This is why transposition is one of the most confusing aspects and why it can take you a long time, which is why it's important to use that step-by-step process that I was using. And what makes it harder is when, in examples like this, for the clarinet in A, the key signature is transposed, but for the bass clarinet, it's not transposed. The key signature. The key signature is just put in like generic C, and all the accidentals are written in. So you got all those sorts of difficulties and challenges, but I think that helps you. I would like to give you maybe one more example that was in there on their test. So they have, for instance, they have one that's trombone, and the trombone is playing a, let me just double check here. They have two sharps, like I told you it was two sharps in the key signature, and it's playing written that note, which is a C sharp. And the other instrument is trumpets in B, which means B flat for us. So trumpets in B flat. So this is trombone right here on the bass clef. And then we have trumpet in B flat. And the trumpet in B flat has written this. Now, there's nothing in the key signature, and they still put a flat, rather a natural sign next to it, which is like, oh, but you know, listen, these are the, I didn't make up all these conventions. I'm just trying to explain it all right? So the trumpet in B flat, we know the transposition is whatever it looks like for the trumpet, it actually sounds a major second below. So what it means is that you're hearing a C sharp down here, because this C sharp looks like a C sharp, and it sounds like a C sharp. And this looks like a C natural, but sounds like a B flat. And then the question will be, what's this interval? Now, if you look at C sharp and you look at C natural and just don't realize that this trumpet is transposing and how it's transposing, you will not be able to identify that interval correctly. This is how they're going to test you on knowing your transpositions by looking at a score. They're going to ask you to compare intervals between instruments that are in concert and not in concert, or like we did here between the clarinet in A and the clarinet and bass clarinet in B flat, two different transposing instruments. This is how they're going to test you. And then they're going to say, what's the interval? So for this, if they asked you, what's the interval between this note and this note, you would say octave, bass clarinet and clarinet. You just assume, even though it looks like it's on the same treble clef, we know it's a bass clarinet. You would say an octave, and you'd be in good shape. Here, you would say diminished seventh. That is how you would identify that interval. Alrighty, I'm now going to take a look at the chat, and one of the things I promised I would do so that I don't run into technical difficulties like I did before is to go and always look at the bottom, the most recent chat, so that if something goes wrong and you all start typing, Dr. B, we can't see you, we can't hear you, you said something completely wrong, I'll look in the chat and I'll be able to look into and I'll be able to catch you. So I'm going to be scrolling up and down to keep up with stuff. So anyways, I'm going to the top of the chat for now. Well, I got someone who's thanking me, which is always appreciated. So thank you very much, Abraham. I'm glad it's working out for you. Martin, glad you're finding this interesting. I love all this stuff. So choral tenor, yeah, you're late. So was I. I started a half hour late. So that's what happened. So we lost a little bit of people at the beginning, but that was my fault. I was solving some technical issues. All right. Yeah, you're right. For oboe, Hautbois, it means like high wood. So it also could mean loud or high. Sometimes the way it gets translated. And so for an oboe, it's kind of like a very literal way of determining. Like oboes were a fairly loud instrument, the double reed instrument. So yeah, it is funny how they have that. All right, I got another comment here. I said, I find it quite interesting that the double bass is written transposed by an octave, but in contrast to the classical guitar, its clef has no little 8 attached. That's a great point, Gabby. Great point, right? So when we talk about the double bass, when a double bass plays this note, it actually sounds like, so it's a concert instrument, but it transposes by the octave, which is a whole, like I warned you that there was all these levels of complexities and exceptions, right? So the double bass is a transposing instrument in the sense that it transposes things down the octave. It's not a transposing instrument in the sense that the pitch is the same pitch. So if we look at this and say, oh, that's an E, yeah, but what you're actually hearing is this E down this octave. So if it's written this way, it's going to sound there. As opposed to a cello. Like if a cello sees this E here on the third space bass clef, it sounds like that one. It sounds like that one right there below middle C. If a double bass plays that same written note, they're reading it on their music, it sounds down here. Now, what Gabby's referring to is that sometimes you'll see a little 8 written below things. Not usually below a bass clef, but very commonly beneath a treble clef. And what that means is it's treble clef, but it sounds down the octave. So these little 8s, look for those. Those are sometimes indicators to show that it's not, because keep in mind, this treble clef, it's saying that this G is the G above middle C. This specific G. If we put an 8 here, it now means it's the G below middle C. It's down the octave. So it's trying to tell you exactly which G we're talking about, exactly which pitch level. So you're right, it is interesting that they don't do that for the double bass, but in effect, that's what is happening. So that's a very good observation and a good point. Yeah, and choral tenor marks that, yeah, as a tenor, you get those when you use the treble clef, the G clef. So a tenor singer will often be reading treble clef, but they'll have that 8 because they're not usually singing up at the same pitch level that the soprano is. You know, so this is going to be a pretty, like if we had no 8, let's say, if you were a soprano singing that note, that would be, you know, in the lower part of your range. If you're a tenor, that's pretty good. You're towards the upper part of your range, right? So to make it kind of like the same comfort, the 8, if you put an 8 below, that means for the tenor, now that's down below middle C, and that's going to be more in their kind of the comfort range. The other thing, and another reason they do this, is that it's kind of like part of the thing that another aspect that affects the timbre of an instrument, whether it be a voice or an actual like woodwind brass instrument, is the range. If you're singing or playing a note that's like the highest note you can play, the timbre has this tension to it. You're probably having to use more air. It's got more tension. If you're playing on a string instrument, there's more tension on the string. It has this intensity, and the timbre changes. Whereas if you're in the middle, in the comfort, the easy part of your range, it has a different quality. So sometimes the reasons you orchestrate things in different is you might want the piece to feel relaxed, in which case you want it to be in an instrument that can play that note in the comfortable part of their range. Or you might be writing a melody that needs to have this intensity, this passion, in which case you write it in for an instrument where that note is going to be in the upper part of their range and it's going to have that intensity. So that's another aspect that goes into all this transposition orchestration question. Good point, good point. We have another comment here. I read through Adler's study of orchestration last week. This is reinforcing that study. Yes, yes, yes. Samuel Adler. Look at here, just so you know that I'm legit too, right? That's the book I used. Samuel Adler's. This is the one I had from 2 decades ago, and it's got all this. This is all about orchestration. This entire book. It gives you so much information about transpositions, about range, about how to write it, what clefs to use. So Samuel Adler, Study of Orchestration, excellent book. It comes with a workbook as well, right? This is again this is the 2nd edition. I'm sure they're more modern than that now, but in there you got all sorts of little things you can do in terms of studying. You can look at scores and they ask you to transcribe things and like put it, change this piece for keyboard, for a string orchestra, and how would you do it? Marking the bowings, because that's a whole other thing. When you're talking about woodwind instruments or brass instruments or string instruments, like how they bow, is it going to be an up bow or a down bow? It makes a difference, So Samuel Adler's study of orchestration gets into that nitty-gritty, all those super details. And so what I'm doing is kind of just dealing with the whole, like, just getting the pitches and understanding the pitches and a few of the other ideas that need to go along with that. But I'm not going anywhere near as in depth as Samuel Adler does. And certainly at some point, I might do a series of videos that just goes through all the orchestration stuff that's done. But that's a huge job that sadly I don't have time to be doing right now in the middle of an academic year. But there's a lot of great information in Samuel Adler's book. But it's dense reading. So Dean, I'm glad you're watching this because yeah, sometimes there's so much information it can easily become overwhelming or hard to put all the pieces together. So I'm glad you're watching this video right now and getting some review that's helping cement that knowledge. So great. Life of Brian say, jingle, call Gloria Estefan, doctor. All right, I'm glad that we got someone who's coming up with ideas for my jingle. Again, I wanted to say, ask Dr. B about music theory, because that's kind of my tagline. But yes, if you expand that with some, typically like you can repeat words for a jingle. It doesn't have to just be syllabically set. It could be melismatic. You can have, so yes, if Gloria Estefan did me a Dr. B Music Theory jingle, I would go through the roof. That would be so amazing. So in the style of Gloria Estefan, I'll take it. All right. The British English for English horn is cor anglais, which is French for English horn. Yes, that's a great point. Again, the different languages. It's easy when you're looking at this stuff that if you haven't encountered that word before, you'll have to be like, what instrument do I think that is? I don't know. There you might have to be like, well, what clef is it written in? What instruments is it next to? So that's absolutely true. But let me write that. So cor means horn, and anglais is English. So we would say English horn, but that's the direct translation, right? If we're going to go from French. So English horn, so we can see the similarities. And again, English horn is more like an oboe. It's a deeper instrument. It's somewhere in range between the oboe and the bassoon. Bassoon is a double reed instrument, so is oboe. The English horn is in between, but closer to the oboe. So yeah, thanks, choral tenor. Good point. Dean Whitlock, now symphony in H-mole makes sense. Yes, H-mole. Right? We're talking about in B flat. Right? And then choral tenor says, blame Johann Sebastian Bach. So there's Johann Sebastian Bach, when you're a composer and you're composing for years and years and years, you got to keep life interesting. So Bach would make up melodies, and he would take his name. He'd be like, B is for B, A is for A, B is for B flat, A, C, and B natural. So you'd have this. And he'd use his name for like the theme of like a composition, like just as like a fun exercise. Think about like crossword puzzles. Like if you're a composer, what's the composer version of a crossword puzzle or Sudoku? It's doing crazy stuff like this with your name and saying, I'm going to use my name as the theme here, and my B is going to be, B is for B flat, because we know that's what the Germans do, and H is going to be for the B natural, right? So yeah, there's some connection there. Good point. All right, so have I ever heard of Brian Wilson's Smile? I think you may have asked, and I have not. So I'm going to write a note to myself. Brian Wilson's Smile, and actually I'm going to follow my own rule and go back down to the bottom and see if anyone's told me that my sound cut out, but I have not. So that's excellent. Brian Wilson's Smile. I will look into it. I love checking out new stuff. Just trying to figure out where I'm going to write it down. One second. Grab my pen from nearby and put Brian Wilson's smile. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, thank you, thank you. So thanks, Life of Brian. We got another one. So I thought there were solfege names for flat and sharps. There are. Jeff, you make a great point. You make a great point. Yes, and this is why I don't think I'm ever going to run out of things to talk about for Dr. B Music Theory. There's just so many things to talk about. So Jeff is asking, saying, so for do, re, mi, fa, sol, and let's make room here, la, ti, and that's English, so we could call that C. So let's call it C, right? Let's call it C. This is would be the Italian, because we're not using ut, which would be French. So Jeff is saying wasn't there chromatic for solfege, and there is. So in general, to go up a half step, you put an I you. And this is why an American solfege, and this is the one I'm more familiar with, uses T because they use C for so sharp, and they use se for so flat. So the E is like an A, so re, se. So la, le. So la flat is the same as sol sharp. So si, le. So there's chromatic syllables for solfege as well. All true. Now, all that's true, and that's a whole other topic that I don't want to necessarily get all the way into right now. But what I do want to do is tie it back to our question on transposing instruments, because for English, we're going to say E flat. In Germany, we'll say S. And in French and Italian, we might say mi flat. Why don't they just say me, right, instead of mi flat? I don't know the answer to that. That's a great historical question, how these things evolved. Couple things to keep in mind. Nowadays, in a more global culture, we kind of assume that everyone's going to use the same terminology for stuff. But let's just be clear, right? We don't all speak English, so we don't even use the same language. There's different languages in different countries. Even international things. It's only the more recent things. So like Wi-Fi might be something that's a little bit more universal. So things that are more common, that were developed new for the global for our global culture, have one name. But metric system versus I'm using inches and feet over here. There's other people who are like, what is he doing? Haven't they learned about centimeters and millimeters? So there's the same is a problem as the issue with music theory. The standardization of terminology is not 100% agreed upon. So when we talk about music theory, and I'd be like, this is what you call it. I'm trying to use the most commonly used terms, but it's not going to always be the only term that's used. So that lends a whole level of complexity, because you have to then be able to say, oh, this is one way of calling it, and here's another way of calling it. It's kind of like the language version of synonyms, right? So instead of calling things, you could say, well, why don't they just call it me? Or, instead of calling it fizz in German, or F, whatever that was for French, why don't they just call it fi, right? Because that would be the fa sharp. They don't. I'm not sure why. Different naming conventions in different parts of the world, developing at different times historically, lends in part to the complexity, so that when you're looking at a transposed score, you need to decipher the terminology. And again, that's one of the reasons I laid out for you the English, the German, the Italian, the French, and when this video is all done, I'll put some links to some websites that kind of do a good job with putting up tables and charts for you that help explain those different naming conventions in the different languages, as well as the different ways to designate the key, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah. So great question, Jeff. Yeah, there are different solfege names for flats and sharps. They're just not used for transposing instruments frequently. That's just very rare. That's very rare. Yeah, mi flat, exactly. It's strange, right? It's not what I would have expected either, but that's why we have to study all this stuff and learn all the different naming conventions. All right. Gabby, no, it wasn't Bach's fault. The H in German instead of B is based on a typo reading error. B and H or lowercase b and H can look quite similar in bad handwriting. Since then, we have to call it H and B flat. Call it H and B flat is B. Oh, I did not know that. That's a very interesting. I can believe that. I'm sure Bach. I'm not surprised that Bach wasn't the person who invented that, but he certainly cemented it by doing that and being such a prominent composer. But that's a good point, Gabby, and I haven't read that, but that sounds absolutely believable to me. The idea that you're going to have different ways of writing things just so it's clear. Like it goes total sense. This is why I love when I see, when I want you to write major and versus minor, I'm like, these are too easily confused, right? So when we're doing lead sheet symbols, if I want C major, C minor, if it's a C major 7, I might want C MA7 or C, even if we do C M7, I want C. So I guess the best way would be C major 7 versus C minor 7, right? The reason I don't like either one of those is because those two M's can be easily confused, just like what Gabby's saying about the lowercase h and b and stuff in German. If the handwriting is sloppy, it's hard to tell the difference. So because of that, I like C MA7, because MA can't be confused, and I like C minus sign 7. Because for me, these are going to be super obvious, clearly different, and I know exactly what they are. Same concept as what Gabby's talking about. So yeah, cool. I love learning new stuff. All right, I'm going to go down to the bottom. Hautbois. Oh, thanks, choral tenor. Hautbois. Thank you. Yeah, my French pronunciation is just out. It's atrocious. Hautbois. But yes, maybe loud wood makes more sense. Yeah, because they called O and Ba, and so in the Middle Ages, that they would often categorize instruments as to whether they were loud or soft instruments. And the idea was that if you were a composer, you would be putting only loud instruments together with other loud instruments and only soft instruments together with other soft instruments. So that was kind of a convention historically in the Middle Ages for instrumental composers. And one of the reasons that it took a while for composers to start to figure out how to write for mixed ensembles, right? So an orchestra, like what we're talking about, reading a transposed score, this is actually a major achievement. Like, what's the right instruments to put together, how many, so it comes off balanced and works together, right? So when we're talking about violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, double bass. Well, why violin 1 and violin 2? Why two different violin parts? Why not violin 1, violin 1? Why not just violin, viola, cello, bass? Why have two violin parts? And if you're not going to have two violin parts, why not have violin, viola, viola, cello, bass? Why that? And then what wind instruments and how many, right? So for the violin family, you usually have more than one person on each part. But for the woodwinds, you usually have just, so if you have a flute 1 and a flute 2, like, why 2 flutes? Why not 3? So all of this has to do with the balancing of loud and soft instruments in the right numbers and the right ratios so that you can get an ensemble that sounds good. So this is kind of a long tangent to what choral tenor is doing to correct my pronunciation, is dealing with this idea of orchestration and the volume of the instruments and how they need to be balanced in terms of numbers with other instruments. So good stuff to know. All right. So Dean, up a major second or down a minor seven. I'm not quite sure where you're referring to. I'm sure it was relevant when I was talking about it, but I do not remember exactly where that happened. So if you want to ask again, that would be great. You know, you make a great, I can answer that a little bit for you right now, Dean. As I mentioned, when I'm talking about reading the transposed score, the main thing I focused on was getting the right pitch, not the right octave. So down a major second is the same pitch as up a minor seven. It's just going to be a different octave, right? So if we have, let's say, you are witnessing, I guess I've used enough of this to write. I think we are done. I think we're done with these. Okay, I'm gonna have to draw a quick staff because swapping these out will take a little too long. But let's just draw a makeshift staff here for you. If we have, let's say, trumpet in B flat or B flat clarinet, whatever, and they're playing, they see that C. The question is it down a major second or up a minor seven? We're going to get the same pitch, but the octave will be different. So it really will depend on the actual instrument that's in B flat. So if it's a traditional B flat clarinet or clarinet, let me spell that right, sorry about that. If it's a traditional B flat clarinet or B flat trumpet, then it's down a major second. That's the right octave. So it will be written in treble clef, and it actually sounds down a major second. But there's certainly some instruments that where it might be the opposite. Now there's not too many for B flat that will be like this, because the other B flat instrument that I mentioned before was the bass clarinet, which means that's going to sound down the octave, not up the octave. But there are instruments that make you go up as opposed to down. So like French horn typically will. Actually, no, not French horn. French horn doesn't do that. But some of the instruments that are lower pitch instruments will have you go up a minor seven instead of down the major second. So it's a good point, and it deals with the octave. But there's some good resources that you can look up online, or you can have that Samuel Adler book on orchestration, and they'll let you know about the octave, whether it's transposing instruments going up the octave or down. All right. Yeah. All right, we got Abner asking, hey, I was curious as to how you make a melody in context with a chord progression. So let me answer that question, Abner. So how, and I'm just double checking, making sure my power levels are working and everything. Everything looks like it's still working good. I think we might work without too many technical difficulties. All right, so let me answer that for you. How to make a melody in the context in context with a chord progression. So let's say our chord progression is C major triad, F major triad, D minor triad, G major triad. All right, let's say that's my chord. If I wanted to do a Roman numeral analysis, I'd say this is the key of C major. It's a 1 chord, going to a 4 chord, to a 2 chord, to a 5 chord. And that would sound like this is a very common chord progression. So you could say, all right. I repeat it. So the question often is, what comes first, the melody or the harmony? Is it the harmony first, and then like this, I just made a harmony, and then I can put a melody, I can make a melody to go with it? Yeah, you can absolutely do that. You can also do it the other way around. You can say, I have a melody. Here's how it goes. Now, what chords go to that? So, or you can kind of do them both at the same time. Usually what happens is if you have a melody, there's some harmony basics at least that are implied. But you can start with just harmony and say, okay, now I would like to create a melody. And you might be... So I'm going to go, and at this point I'm going to want to have a staff again. So let me just draw in my staff, see how steady I can be in terms of drawing my lines. Not quite good enough to be a surgeon. Not quite steady enough that you want me to do any of that. All right, so I'm going to go. And so, ba ba. So 1 da da dee da. So I have, it sounds to me like I'm going rest. Da, da, dee, da, dee, da. Ba, dee, da. Right, so here's what I'm just making this up on the spot. So and again, the question that Abner was asking was, how do you make a melody in context with a chord progression? So I made up a chord progression first in this case, and I could have done a melody first, but I chose to do the harmony first, since I think that's what you were asking. And then I said, I just kind of used my ear, and I was like, what am I going to do? Ba da dee da 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 dee. So ba da dee da 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 da. And so let's analyze what I did. What am I doing? I picked a note that was in my chord. So that you want your melody to be in the right context. And the way you phrase that question is a little unusual. That's not normally the way I think a musician would phrase that question. How do you make a melody that works with a chord progression? I think instead of saying melody in context is probably not the way you would say it, but that fits or works with a chord progression. And so what you want to do is you want to use primarily chord tones. So each one of these chords has 3 notes in it. So C major triad has C, E, G. F major triad has F, A, C. So you want to primarily chord tones. Then non-chord tones, which is what NCTs mean, following the rules. And I put rules in quotation mark. So I have a bunch of lesson videos that talk about non-chord tones that gives you tons of good information on this. But if I were to analyze this, this is a chord tone. It's the fifth. Then this is a neighbor tone, upper neighbor, back to the 5th, 3. This here is a passing tone. Then we go to the 5th of that chord, neighbor tone, back to the 5th. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chord tones versus 3 non-chord tones. You will also notice that the non-chord tones tend to be fairly short in duration. That's not like I'm holding a non-chord tone for a long period of time. 2 of them occur on upbeats, which is also the same thing as saying a weak beat, and only 1 of them occurs on a strong beat, beat 2, on a downbeat. So that's the essence of what I'm doing is I'm kind of at this juncture, I've heard enough melodies that my ear is going to tell me a lot in terms of what makes a good melody. But if I were to get stuck and need to use my theory, I would say, well, let me say what should come after that. Let's say we know we're going to this D minor triad, and I've got. And I know the notes in the D minor are going to be D, F, A. So let's say I'm stuck. My ear's not working. I don't have anything. Well, I know I could start on any D, F, or A, and those notes would be good because they're in the triad. Then I have to come up with, well, what kind of rhythm should I use? Well, you know, you want to have a variety of rhythm. You don't want it to just be like all quarter notes or all eighth notes. So when you're creating a melody, you're creating both pitch and rhythm, and there's an implied harmony as well. So there's really, you got a lot of things to be thinking about. So let's just say I had ba da dee da 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 dee and I want to be like, let me just say, okay, I haven't had an F yet, so how about an F, right? Because I've had G, A, G, E, D. Okay, I've had an A, I've had a D, but I haven't had an F, so I'm just going to go to an F. What would that sound like? Let me see, right? So I just try it out. That's what it would be like. And so when I'm making a melody that's going to fit with those chords, I'm looking for chord tones. And I'm usually going to start on a chord tone. Or if I'm going to use a non-chord tone, I'm going to make it a neighbor tone where it just goes, it starts on it. It's a neighbor tone. The reason a neighbor tone works so well is that it's sandwiched between two chord tones. So it's like, here's something that works with the chord, here's something that doesn't. Oh, I'm right back to where I was, don't worry. It was just I just went, it's like going to your neighbor's house to get a cup of coffee or a cup of sugar, right? You didn't even need to really get all the way dressed. You put on your slippers, you walk over, you're coming right back, right? That's what a neighbor tone's like. Passing tones, you're just passing through, right? Here's a chord tone, here's a chord tone, you're just passing through. So again, it's sandwiched between two chord tones. So that's kind of the concept of neighbor tones, is that they're surrounded. They are in the context of chord tones. So just using my theory, I might be like, I want to have an F, and then I'm going to be like, I want to have different variety of rhythmic note values. So I might go bum, 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 bum. So let's say I'm just going to go F, F, E, dotted quarter note eighth, E, D, whole note, right? And so this is my D minor, and I'm going third, third. This is a passing tone, and I just repeat it. And I'm going to the fifth of the G chord. So if I go, here's my whole melody. So again, da 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 ya da da dee da 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 da. Super simple, just something just that, nothing too complicated, right? But that's how I could start with a harmonic progression that I know works, and kind of come up with a melody by knowing what notes go in each chord, by knowing the kind of rules for non-chord tones, and just making sure that the balance between the chord tones and the non-chord tones is definitely skewed, pretty significantly to more chord tones than non-chord tones, and that the non-chord tones aren't being emphasized too much by coming on all the strong beats or being held for long. So you'll notice, like, the longest notes are chord tones, and even these two right here, it's essentially a half note worth of rhythm. That's as long as we got, but it's still sandwiched between two chord tones. So Abner, I know there's a lot more that can be said about that, but I hope that at least gives you some things to kind of help you get started with that. Dean saying, I thought horn parts were written with accidentals. Well, sometimes they are. Like in certain scores, they'll I had up. So the clarinet in A had a key signature that was accurate, and that meshed, was also transposed. So F major for clarinet in A is the same thing as D major for violin. But the French horn, the bass clarinet in B flat, and the trumpet in B flat were written with no key signature and just with accidentals. So you really have both things happening, Dean. You have horn parts being written with accidentals, and you have key signatures that are minimizing the need for lots of accidentals within the part. So it's what the rules are for each, I'm not sure if there's 100% standardized rules on which way it should be done. I think the guiding principle normally is what's easiest for the performer to read. So sometimes it's just easier to just write in the accidentals for the horn player and don't worry about key signatures. Sometimes it's easier, like in the case of clarinet and A, it's writing in the key of with one flat. Now, I don't think like what that would have meant for the bass clarinet in B flat and the trumpet in B flat would mean 4 sharps, which doesn't seem like too many to me. Like if I was writing it, I would probably use that key signature. But it's very chromatic. This whole piece is very chromatic. So maybe sometimes what will happen is a composer will write it using the key signatures that transpose, and then it's like all these like G double sharps and like things like that. So E major, that is a lot of, that's 4 sharps. And if you have a lot of chromaticism on top of that, where you start getting C double sharps and D double sharps and G double sharps, it's just easier to write it without a key signature. And instead of writing G double sharp, just write an A, right? So the same thing that sometimes I'm sure many of you have said, like studying music theory, where like, why is this called a diminished seventh, and why is there's this enharmonic stuff, and why are we talking D double sharp and blah, 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 blah. Why don't they just write? Well, the answer is they do for transposition. That's when they decide it. So for theory, they want us to be able to think all those different intervals and how they work and how it would be theoretically structured. But when push comes to shove and you actually got to put music in front of an orchestra, because think about this, right? You're Mozart. You're a genius. But you work real hard. But sometimes you leave things to the last minute. You're writing your symphony. It's in your head. It's in your head. It's in your head. And then you're like, oh, concert's tonight. I better write this out because I have it memorized because I've got a photographic memory and I've got perfect pitch. And and I've worked really hard since I was really, really young. And my dad was a musician and he taught me. So I can hold it all in my head, but the entire orchestra can't do that. So I better write it out. Now, when Mozart is writing this out, he's probably not, he's like, I'm just writing out as quick as possible so that it's as easy to play as possible for the horn player. The horn player doesn't care if it's really technically should be C double sharp as opposed to a D. The horn players probably say, why don't you just write me a D? And Mozart's like, I will, right? So that is part of the process in terms of determining, do you use the key signature that it should be used for the appropriate music theory transposition, or do you just write in accidentals? And the guiding principle will be what's easiest for the performer. If you can just write in the accidentals and avoid lots of double sharps, double flats, naturals, and things like that, then that's probably what you should do. All right. Righty. Okay. Pranav, about the jingle, do you expect from people to put vocals in it as the lyrics you want? Because I'm not a singer. P.S. What kind of music are you expecting for a 3-second jingle? So yes, I do want lyrics, and it doesn't matter if you're not a singer. Let me tell you why. We as musicians, I'm not a singer, right? I'm a saxophone player. I'm not a pianist. I'm a saxophone player. But as a good musician, I've opened my mouth and I've sung. I've also played the piano, and I've also played some drums, right? Because singing is the best thing you can do to understand melody. Playing piano is probably the best thing you can do to understand harmony. Playing drums is probably the best thing you can do to understand rhythm. So think about, who's that guy? Like Randy Newman, who's like, you got a friend in me. Like, he's not a great singer. Think about he's not a great singer let me rephrase that. He's a great singer. He's not a great singer in the traditional operatic, clear voice, perfect intonation, pristine vocal quality, traditional standard approach, right? And there's a lot of pop singers and rock singers who their singing is effective, it works, it conveys emotion, it's musical, but it's not necessarily the best singing in terms of range, purity of tone, clarity of pitch. Sometimes it gets a little raspy. It's like the style of the music will determine whether that style of singing will work or not. If you were to try to sing a Puccini aria in the style of Randy Newman, it probably wouldn't work, right? But if you, by the same token, and I might offend some opera singers, just as I don't think Randy Newman could really sing a great version of, of a Puccini aria, I don't think most opera singers could sing a great version of Randy Newman's song, right? There's stylistic things that are important, and some things are universal and will translate, and you can do certain things in different styles. So there are some songs you can sing in an operatic style and it works, but there are other songs that you can't sing in an operatic style. It just sounds weird. It just doesn't work. So Pranav, what I am asking for is, yeah, I want lyrics. So maybe that's you singing in your non-singer style and figuring out a way to make it work. Or maybe you got a friend who can lay down a track. Maybe you do something creative, right? Like I'm not going to write it for you, but maybe you do. Ask Dr. B about music theory. Maybe you whisper it, right? So you like, I want the words, whether it's sung. I'm not quite sure I'm ready for like the screamo version, but maybe, right? Maybe you just scream it like it's all like, ask Dr. B about music theory. I don't know. I'm open. I'm open to styles. So it doesn't have to be like beautiful singing. It doesn't have to be bel canto. It could be any kind of singing. It could be whispering. It could be speaking. It could be spoken word. It could be screamed. If it works, it works. That's kind of what what I'm looking for. And let me see. There's a second part to your question. Yes, I do expect people to put vocals in, and those vocals could be spoken, sung, screamed, shouted, whatever works. What kind of music am I expecting? Something that's short and interesting. It's not looking, there's no development. It's like a jingle, right? So you might be like, ask Dr. B about music theory, ba-dump, ba-dum, bump. That's it, right? Just a little tag. We're not looking for anything symphonic. Just a short little thing like what I just improvised right there. All right. Okay. Pranav asks, what about audiation and how to practice it to write melody without an instrument? Yeah, so when you talk about audiation, it's like I'm getting to imagine the pitches as you hear them. This is why I think singing is good. So when you say you're not a singer, I'm going to tell you what I tell my students when they tell me stuff like that. I say wrong. You are a singer. You're a human being. You got vocal cords. You're going to be a singer. Might not be your primary instrument. You might not be necessarily good at it right away. But we are all singers. We should all sing some. So let's rephrase that so no longer will you say I'm not a singer. You'll say I'm working on my singing. There you go. All right? You're not saying you're a great singer. You're saying I'm working on my singing. And you should, because that's probably the best way to do it. When I first went to New York City and I was playing a lot of jazz, had a teacher, and I was playing for him, and he said, you play all this chromatic stuff, but you don't play chromatic within a diatonic context very well. And I was like, huh? He's like, you either play diatonic in a key other than what's happening right now, or you play diatonic in the key that is happening right now. But you don't play chromatic within that key. And I kind of was scratching my head. I didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But the idea of if we have a C major triad, and I go, that's chromatic within the diatonic context. And and don't worry, I'm going to get to your question about audiation and how to hear the melody. But let me just give you this little bit so that that can be understood. You're playing a C major triad. If you go G, G flat, F, D sharp, E, this is what I would call chromaticism within a diatonic context. So the G flat's not in the key, the D sharp's not in the key, but the G flat's a passing tone, the D sharp's a kind of like, you could say, this is like an enclosure or an upper lower neighbor, or so like passing tone to a lower neighbor, so you could kind of say it's like an appoggiatura, but this is your chord tone, the G, and this is your chord tone, the E. And that's a nice little chromatic formula that works really, really well. What I used to do is I would play something like, I would play that on a C chord. I would be implying an E flat 7, right? So right, which kind of sounds like, well, maybe that's a sharp 9, flat 9, and a flat 7, but it's different, right? It's definitely different. Oh, and I could be certainly doing things that are even more less related, let's say. So maybe I'm going, like applying an A flat 7 over that has like only the C in common, right? So I was really into like substituting chords for other chords. And that's where I got my chromaticism. And as opposed to this, which is kind of emphasizing, using chromaticism to emphasize the notes that are already in the key. And when I did that, what my teacher was telling me is that I was playing things that were like very complex chromatically and harmonically, but he had the sense that I wasn't really hearing those things as clearly as I could. It was more of an intellectual, theoretical exercise than a musical, emotional, me hearing it exercise. And it really stuck with me, and I said, well, what if I had to sing my melodies, right? Because if I can sing the melody, then I know I'm hearing it. I'm not just using my theory, and it's not just an intellectual exercise. And I found that I couldn't sing the level of complexity that I was playing on the saxophone typically. I couldn't sing it. My ears, so I was like, oh, I'm not really hearing those. I'm just using my theory. Not 100%, but at least in part. So I said, let me back it up. And I'm just gonna sing the simplest thing. So I'm gonna play my piano, and I'm just gonna go da 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 da. And I'm just gonna like only sing things that I could, like only play melodies and improvise melodies that I can sing. And I'm a bad singer. And I would tell myself, don't call yourself a bad singer, Dr. B. Tell yourself you're a singer working on it. So I tell myself, I'm a singer working on my singing. I'm working on my singing. And I would start trying to improvise melodies, and I would have to just do it very simple. So I'd like play the bass line, and I would just try to play the melody. Kind of like what George Benson, the jazz guitarist, would do, where he plays a solo on his guitar and sings it while he's playing the solo, which I think is like the coolest thing ever. So I'd be like, here's the bass line. And I'd be like, da 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 da. And I would start, and eventually, like at first it was just like da 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 dee da. I had to like repeat the note, go up by step, like scales. Like I had to like, because one, my ear wasn't as advanced as it should be. My singing wasn't as advanced as I wanted it to be. And so to develop my audiation of hearing, I sat and I played bass notes on the piano, and I tried to improvise a melody and play it with, like George Benson does with his solos, but play that on the keyboard. And then I was able to get more and more complicated, so that I could finally be like, ba da 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 ba da ba da 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 za ba da ya da. And I can kind of like hear all that, and I'm using this kind of stuff, and I can start getting into like, and then I started developing and started being like, oh, now I hear how to imply these other chords on top of chords and be chromatic with in a different key, right? But it took me, I had to take many steps backwards in my improvisation to really make sure that my ear was hearing it. And the only way I could make sure my ear was hearing it was by singing it. Because if I could sing it, that means I had to hear it. So that's what I recommend. Try to do that. Like take a C major triad and just be like da 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 da, or E E E D C C D E G G G A G, and just start improvising using the scale, playing the triad, and then playing that melody. You might do that on the guitar too, right? A la George Benson. So there's a number of ways that you can work on getting those ears connected. But I think singing is the best and easiest way to do that. Alrighty. We are going to wrap things up reasonably shortly because this has been a good long session. Yeah, I mean, I certainly, so the Dr. B Music Theory jingle was not going to be something that's for everyone right away, right? You might not have the equipment necessary. That's okay. This is not an assignment. I'm not going to give you an F if you don't do it. This is only if you have the equipment, if you have the desire and the equipment, then certainly you can do it. And if not, this is something that you might think, I can't do this now, but what would I need to, what equipment would I need to get to be able to do this? Or maybe I don't feel quite confident enough in my singing or my ability to compose a melody. How would I develop those skills so that if Dr. B does another thing next month, then maybe I'm ready, or maybe in a couple months I can be ready, right? So this is one of the reasons I like this idea of having the jingle contest, is that for those of you who that's a little outside of your comfort zone, it might give you something to shoot for. And if you don't make it, that's okay. You're going to learn something in that process, right? If you try it and it doesn't work, it's like science, right? You try an experiment. If it doesn't work, that means you've discovered something. You've discovered what's not going to work, and you have a better chance of discovering something new the next time. Or you've developed further skills on how to do something. So I'm not worried about that. Give it a shot. You're going to submit the entries to my email address, cbsaxophone@gmail.com. Alrighty. All right, we've got another question here. I'm a singer and I use the TC Helicon to pitch correct, and then I adjust my pitch to that off Music Notes app, for example. Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I haven't used that, but there's a lot of great apps and programs out there that can help you. So let's say you're like, oh, my pitch isn't quite as good as I want. I mean, auto-tune has been around forever, and there's a lot of similar things that you can use. Like, I don't consider that cheating. I mean, I think you should always try to learn how to sing in pitch and not need to use auto-tune. That's a great skill to have. But if you're producing music and you use auto-tune to help get to that product, that's no problem. That's a good... Prince Jordan, that's a wonderful little tip, the TC Helicon to pitch correct. I haven't used it, but that's a good tip. Thank you. Most people, this is also Prince Jordan saying, most people think singing is easy and a linear process. Singing teachers are invaluable and very necessary, and singing is a non-linear, difficult process. I'm happy to say that I work with some amazing vocal teachers, and I once I was asked to sing the part of John Adams in the musical 1776, just one song, and I was like, oh man, I don't know about this, and so I went and I took a voice lesson. It was so helpful, and if I had more time, I'd be taking voice lessons every week. And I went out and sang, and it was so funny because some of my former students who were really good singers were in the audience, and I don't normally get nervous, but I got a little nervous. I was like, oh man, here's all these students that I've been telling them what to do, right? And they're definitely better singers than I am. And now I'm gonna go ahead and sing like I'm not just singing something goofy or I'm singing an actual song from a musical. Whew, that took just a little bit of courage, but I did it, and it was a ton of fun, right? It wasn't I tried to make my performance interesting not only from the vocal standpoint, I did my best in terms of singing pitch with the right breath control, but I tried to put in some acting and some stage presence and things like that to make it an entertaining and an interesting performance. So I agree with you, Prince Jordan. Singing teachers are invaluable. All right, Dean's going to take up singing. Awesome. Choral tenor has a recommendation. Jeff Rolka, loads of great musical singing practices for all voices. Pranav is asking, what are classical dance forms in music? How can we compose in a particular dance form, such as the saraband, jig, etc.? That is a big topic. I would like you to save that maybe for next time, and I might do a separate one on that. Prince Jordan is through the first 16 Dr. B music theory. Oh, yeah, that's great. So that's one of the things I got to say. Some of the topics I talk about now, these are not in kind of like sequential order. It's great that you're working your way in order through the lessons, 1, 2, 3, up through 16. We got a whole bunch more to go. And then I start doing my Ask Dr. B About Music Theory series, and this is my live Q&A series. And there's definitely some stuff that's going to be that you haven't gotten to yet. But don't worry. You know, sometimes you say, even if you don't understand everything, it's laying a framework for you so that when you do get to those sections, you can be like, oh yeah, I remember Dr. B said something about this thing that I didn't understand, but now that I'm seeing this, it's really coming together. So that's a good way to think about it. So good stuff. Alrighty. Is there a deadline? Yes, there is a deadline for the first one. It's 2 weeks, which I guess is November 7th. For the jingle, this is what we're talking about. Prince Jordan is saying that he was using the app he mentioned not for practicing purposes. He does not use auto tune. And I'm looking for something close to 6 seconds for the jingle, but it could be shorter, right? It could be short, right? Like it's so funny watching television these days, right? So it used to be that every television show needed a theme song, and that theme song would be like a minute, maybe even more long. Now, sometimes there is no theme song for some TV shows. Sometimes it's just like an interval or a chord. It's like, ba-ding, that's it. Or maybe it's something like, like just a little like motive. So I'm looking for a very short jingle, but it could be a longer jingle, right? So I'm thinking somewhere between 6 seconds and 15 seconds. I talk more about it at the beginning of this video, so if you have further questions, just wait till this is all done. You can go back to the beginning. I talk a little bit more. Andrew Norris, good. Thanks for checking in with me. It's late in Croatia, so have a good night's sleep. And with that, everybody, I know I didn't get to everyone's questions. My apologies, or maybe I did get to everyone's questions. Wow, I think I did. This might be the first ever. Thanks for lighting it to simmer down so I could catch up with you all. Great questions. So a few questions I didn't answer please ask them again. I do appreciate it. Lots to keep track of. I'm glad you were here able to join me. It looks good, like we didn't have any technical difficulties. Hey, if you're able to do a jingle and send it, I can't wait to see. If this is not the right time or this is something you need to build up, don't worry, I'm going to do a Dr. B jingle in the future. I don't know about, maybe not next month, maybe in the new year, something like that. But I would love to do that, and I would love, you know, whoever comes up with a real good one, I would love to talk one-on-one, and we can go even deeper into some of the specific questions you have. So with that, enjoy the music, love the music, have fun, and learn lots. Thank you very much. Take care all.